under IPS. Oh, so sorry. Are you sure? Oh, I'll be glad to say it. I'll be glad to. My apologies, first of all, to Ashley Gibson, who wanted to speak on the APS Transformation Zone Mass Insight topic, and it's my understanding that she no longer wishes to speak after we've had our discussion, but we'll give our comments in written form. So my apologies to Ashley. All right, Troy, we're going to get this done here. Okay, next item of business is the teacher licensure exams cut score setting. So the board has received information, and I expect there to be a robust discussion regarding this. And so, Risa, why don't you walk us briefly through it? And I requested of Risa and her department to also send you, and I want to bring your attention to it, the reason for testing. So some of the teachers who are testing are wanting to add to their license, okay? And I feel that was very important information to you as we begin looking at cut scores. With that, Risa?
Okay. We're here today for the next step in the process of reviewing our test taker data from the last year and looking at the analysis of the data that was gathered during some additional score setting studies that were conducted on December 11th and 12th, 2014. As we indicated to you when we were here in November, we began looking at the pass rates of our new licensure tests in the summer. These tests became available in February of 2014, so they have now been in place just about exactly a year. Because both we had concerns and our test vendor, Pearson ES, had some concerns about some of the pass rates, we worked with Pearson to impanel groups of educators and teacher preparation personnel to conduct new score setting studies in December for 10 of the content areas that we were seeing the lowest pass rates on. And we have provided for you an analysis of the data that was gathered during those score setting studies in December, and provided you with two documents that are comparisons that show the shaded column is the current cut score, and the companion piece is the current pass rate. Those are shaded in yellow on your attachments, and then those show as Panel A. Panel B are the recommended cut scores and the associated pass rates that were recommended by the panels in December. The action that we would want from you today, after you have looked at this data and determined how you might want to adjust cut scores in these 10 areas, is to approve cut scores preliminarily. Under your rule, you first give preliminary approval to cut scores, and then we post those preliminary cut scores online for comment for 30 days, along with a summary of the process that was used in the score setting studies. After 30 days, we would then bring back public comments to you on those proposed cut scores, and you would then vote final approval. Scores then, under your rule, become effective 90 days from the date, or no sooner than 90 days from the date that you give final approval. So let's say that you voted final approval for adjusted scores in March at your meeting. That would mean that they could become effective for candidates no sooner than, say, the 15th of June, if that's 90 days, I'm guessing, but that would be about right. So that is the process that happens from whatever action you take today. We also provided through your Friday update, I believe, the additional document that the superintendent referred to, which is self-reported information from test takers when they register to take the test that indicate the reason that they're taking the tests. And as was pointed out, there are a couple of rows here that are highlighted in yellow for you that are individuals who self-reported that they were taking the test in order to add additional areas to their licenses. And I would point out that since 2010, under the REPA licensing rules, it has been possible for individuals to add a number of content areas to their licenses just by passing the test, not necessarily having a program of coursework in those areas. So the number of folks who are taking the test just to add to their licenses may be an indication that they have not completed an approved program of coursework in that content area prior to taking the test. Nancy Hahn, who is a representative from Pearson ES who works with us on our licensure test program, is here to answer any technical or process questions that you might have. We indicated in our memo the department is recommending the panel-based cut scores, which are in the row that's marked Panel B. But we have provided you information on what the pass rates would be for both plus and minus standard errors of measurement from those panel-based scores so that you can have that discussion.
Yes, Carrie.
So to start with, first, I do appreciate, Nancy, I appreciate you doing it. I've sat in on some of this, and it's a very interesting process, and I appreciate the teachers that have come and done this and looked at rescoring this. I've also just heard a lot from, young teachers who are trying to pass the test, and they've spent 4 years in school, and they're facing the same test anxiety some of our kids in class are facing. They've tried this test over and over again and not done well, and either can't get a job because someone won't hire them, or they're on a temporary license, or they've kind of got their corporation saying, you've got to pass this, and understandably so. But a lot of nervous young teachers out there who in my mind want to be there and want to be in the classroom and have worked hard for this. So I appreciate all of the time that's gone into this. My first question is, the recommended scores are given like recommended and then +1, +2, -1, -2. Are we required to vote for everything as a column? Do you see what I'm asking, Reese? Are we required?
Like all of the scores at the panel recommended level are all at -1 or all at?
The answer is no.
No.
Okay. So we could say this group.
We could.
Okay.
Brad, did you have a question?
I had just a quick question. Assuming that we would pass panel scores and it went to 90 days, does the board need to take any additional action for anybody who may have already taken the exam and would then all of a sudden find themselves qualifying? Because I know I hear from a number of those candidates that are hopeful the board will look at the cut scores, but I think that in their mind they're thinking that
They'll get a waiver of some kind
exactly
retroactively.
because of the expense of taking the test multiple times. I think that's where the question's going to go, and I don't know if you need the board to include that or how that gets handled.
Well, that would be a board decision. We have not in the past, either when we used the praxis exams or when this board adjusted the CASA passing scores, the basic skills test scores last summer, we have not in the past made new scores retroactive.
Okay.
But that is a policy decision. And that could be something that you look at the point where you're actually voting final approval of scores.
So people could, given the preliminary scores under public comment, could comment on making scores retroactive. That gives them a voice or an opportunity to express to us that.
Sure. In the public comment site that we use, there's room for them to free-form whatever comments they want to leave. Absolutely. And we will be bringing all of those comments back to you.
tagging on to that, could you explain the process of going back and trying to waive those retroactively? What would the process be?
And I,
Is it even a possibility?
and
Do
I
you-
guess I
do
want to
you-
know psychometrically too, is there
That's
any
what I'm
impact?
asking. Is it a possibility? What's the, I mean, I don't want to say let's do it and we don't even know
Right.
what the ramifications are of doing it.
It's really a policy decision. My experience in having talked to others at evaluation systems is that boards typically do not set retroactive passing standards for a variety of reasons. One of which is, although right now we're talking about tests that have very low pass rates, you also have some assessments that have very high pass rates. And you might want to consider in the future raising standards. If you would go down that road, you have to consider what does that mean. So that's just one example. Is it possible? Yes, but again, it's policy. It's a decision you all have to make.
Sarah?
Looking at the Panel B recommended passing scores, we still have several that fall in the 19% candidates who hit, or 23% candidates that hit. I want to look further into the reason behind that. Is it that the test is too hard? Is it that our students are not prepared when they're coming to take it? To me, those levels, although raised from previous, it still indicates a problem. I can see that coming back to this board again. Do we have any understanding of exactly why those are at such low passing scores, or number of candidates at or above the passing score anyway?
So, which is why I asked Risa to provide to you that last page that talked about reasons why. So at the middle school mathematics level, 66 of the 186 candidates were trying to take the test to just add it to their license. Not necessarily perhaps being as content-oriented, or maybe need to take some courses prior to taking the licensure
So it's a
exam.
preparation issue.
Correct, perhaps. So, and that's why I provided that for you, so you could get a real feel for what was happening and who actually was just entering. I know this panel's talked a lot about the importance of mathematics, and I certainly have. I want our teachers to be mathematically proficient, you know, if they're going to come into the classroom and work with children. So, but that, it does take it. 66 of those candidates, you know, were trying to add it to a license. The same happened in language arts, not as many, but actually the percentage was more. 27 of the students persons who took the middle school ELA were trying to add it to their license. David?
Thanks for being here from Pearson, and the more data you provide, sometimes the more questions you get, and so I'm going to have more than one or two. There's a great discrepancy between the Panel A and Panel B in the same column, for example, and I understand there were different ways in which to score the actual product. But why do you see that discrepancy between Panel A and Panel B, and how does that impact whatever score we come up with?
I think the main reason you're seeing the big discrepancy there is that when these initial standard setting studies were done, they had to be done data-free, which means that we had developed the testing program to be aligned with the REPA standards, the assessment blueprints aligned there. They're brand new standards. However, we did not have the opportunity to collect data to inform the standard setting process. So we were asked to develop a testing program that was rigorous, but the panels, although they felt they understood the process, they made their recommendations. They did not have the benefit to see how these candidates were actually performing on the items. This time what we were able to do was to provide the panels with the percent correct on individual items. And that was one piece of information they were able to use in making their judgments.
Second question has to do with reliability, validity of the Pearson tests. I always hear, I've been in education for 30 years, and seems every week someone says, well, the tests aren't valid, the tests are not reliable. And I always tell them Pearson wouldn't stay in business if they were generating tests that didn't have validity and reliability from a statistical level. Can you speak to that issue? Are these tests valid and reliable?
Well, I think, again, you need to look across the whole program. Right now, here, we're focusing on these 10 tests because of concerns. The exact same process in developing the assessments was used for every single program, or for every single test in the program. So the standards on which these tests were based are Indiana standards, which again is new. This is a change for the state from what had been in place. Every single item was reviewed by an Indiana teacher, and teacher educators participated in that process as well, and they revised those items. And then, in addition, Indiana teachers participated in the standard setting process. So from a validity point of view, the validity is built in all throughout the process. I think some of what you're seeing is that when you introduce change in a state, it can take a while for programs to catch up to the changes that have been implemented. And my understanding is what REPA did was to increase an emphasis on content area preparation.
So the answer is yes,
Yes.
they are valid, they are reliable.
We think they are, yes.
And the information we have is just based on one cohort, right, from 2013 to 2014,
Well, and a very
is that
small,
correct?
yes. It's the first cohort of people who are taking a brand-new testing program.
Right.
Where there was 3 months of overlap with Praxis. So we're at the very beginning of the program.
I have a psychometric question before we go to other people. That is, we have a lot of people spending a lot of time, teachers, teacher educators, probably volunteering their time. I'm not sure if they got paid or not, but I'm sure it wasn't enough. And so a lot of time, a lot of energy put into this. And so we have a set of panel recommendations which are the foundation for validity and reliability of these tests. And I'm trying to understand the other 4 columns, +1, +2, -1, -2. If we've gone through a psychometric process to assure everyone that they're valid and reliable, how can we then make a political decision based on what percentage passed and what percentage didn't pass? It would seem to undermine the whole concept of validity and reliability.
That's a discussion that the board needs to have. From a measurement point of view, there's nothing inappropriate with moving down in a standard error or 2 or up a standard error or 2. But that, again, is a decision for the board to make, considering where candidates are right now in terms of their preparation.
So I would caution us, and we need to have a discussion about that, because seeing what percentage pass or not with this small cohort for a very short time or period doesn't necessarily mean that what we're doing has any validity or reliability to that. It's really a political decision. And I hope we understand we're making a political decision when we start to change the particular pass rates, because pass rates that we finally agree on after it goes to public hearing comes back to us, it's not going to impact this group. It's going to impact future groups. And so the numbers may change dramatically because it's an entirely different cohort. And so I agree with my colleague sitting to my right. Yes, it has really a severe impact on someone's career. But yet, if the test assesses what a new teacher needs to know and be able to do, if the pass rate is high, that's terrific. If the pass rate is low, could be a testing issue, could be a teacher preparation issue, could be an individual issue. So I just think as we set public policy, we have to be really careful that we're not looking at these percentages of pass rates and making quick decisions.
So I have a question. Their elementary education journal subtest 4 includes social studies and fine arts. So, and I don't know what the process would be, but I guess I'd be interested, and I don't know that it will change how I might vote on the preliminary, but before we actually do the final, I think I would like to know, exactly how much of our student scores based upon fine arts as opposed to social studies. And I think we see that also in the science, health, and physical education. Whereas elementary teachers are trained to teach, they can take on all of those subjects. I don't know that the test itself should necessarily be focused on the teaching of art if you're not going to be an art teacher. So I guess I'd just like some more information. I don't know if that can happen.
I actually had asked Nancy to look at the test items on these subtests previously, and I forgot to put this in any of the information. But on the subtest for science, health, and physical education, 70% of the test items are on science, and
Okay.
30% are over health and physical education.
All right.
That's the same pattern for the next subtest, that's social studies and fine arts. 70% of the test items are social studies items, and 30% are fine arts items.
But that could have bearing on whether a person actually passes or not. I mean, they may do very well and got all of the social studies right, but they may not have gotten the arts. And of course, I know this goes back to higher ed, preparing students. What is it that you need to know in order to make sure that you're doing well with what we expect you to come into the elementary classroom with. Andrea?
Is there no middle school social studies? The data's just not reflected, or?
There is a middle school social studies test. What we did for this group was we picked the 10 fields that we felt were most in need of attention immediately.
Okay. And then can you characterize how different is the content? I mean, I understand that the test items are new, but how different is the content from the prior tests?
I'm not familiar with what was on the prior tests. These tests are aligned to the REPA standards that were approved by the board in December of 2010. The RFP that was issued made a specific request that these tests be aligned to the Indiana educator standards.
So then my question is, what percentage change occurred as a result of that?
From the old tests, I don't have that data with me, although I'm sure I know that we could probably put it together for you. The tests that we used before for licensure were ETS products. They were called Praxis 2 tests, and they were nationally normed tests that were used by states all over the country, and they were not aligned to Indiana standards. So to compare the pass rates on those and the content on those of the test items is kind of not an equal comparison.
Yeah, well, and I'm not suggesting the comparison. I'm just curious how different the new tests are from the old praxis.
I don't know.
Yeah. I can share some anecdotal information that I heard as the tests were being developed from Indiana teachers and teacher educators, which in general was, these are much different from the tests I took to become a teacher, but they said that in a good way, that it was a compliment to increasing the rigor in the state. Now that's just anecdotal evidence. I don't know if that helps.
So I'd like an example of the way in which the rigor was increased. I'd like specific examples, perhaps, in the future. Be helpful. I just don't know what that means to increase the rigor of the testing items, and I'd like a better understanding of that.
Carrie?
I have a couple of other questions. So, in follow-up, if past preliminary today, we get feedback from the public, past the final scores, if we set new scores, so they become effective June 15th. How often or when will you come back to us again and say, okay, now with the new scores, they have proven to line up where we thought they would? Because, by then we've gotten more test data in and more results, knowing that some of these have had a fewer number of test takers than others.
Right. When we first brought the core tests and scores to the board for approval in summer of 14, you indicated that it was your wish that we bring live test taker data back annually, after, a year after whatever changes have been made, and that we continue annually to bring you test taker data and pass rates. So, so once these new scores go into effect, we would then put it on our calendars that annually we will bring the test taker data back to you so that you can review it and see the impact of whatever score adjustments you may make.
So at that point, we'll have 5 or 6 more months of the current cut rates, along with possibly 5 or 6, 7 months of the new cut rates. Is it possible when we see that to again see almost those separated out so we
To
can
see them side by side for
to
comparison.
see if the trend still continued in terms of that?
Absolutely.
And then my last question, well, maybe my last, but was regarding, at one point, we talked about practice tests and study guides for the tests. And what, if any, has been discussed further about that, and which tests would get those? Because I think that's a big thing too. If, especially with a new test, I mean, you know, we practice the new test, the new rigor, what's available for them to be studying?
Let me start. The information that we gave you in November, there was a chart that indicated all of the tests for which we currently have practice tests on the website. So, so you already, you know, we've already provided you information on the current practice tests. We're working with Pearson right now. They're developing an additional practice test for the elementary education subtests. They also are developing a practice test for the new school counselor exam, which goes into effect on June the 1st, and middle school math. They're developing a practice test on that. And government, social studies, government, and citizenship. They're developing there has not been a practice test in that area yet. They are developing a practice test on that. As a part of our contractual agreement with Pearson, they will develop a minimum of 3 new practice tests a year for us. And so we are looking at the live test taker data, and we'll continue to do that to determine what additional areas we need to have practice tests in. Eventually, our goal, of course, is to have a practice test on the website for every content test.
And what about like study guides? I know that having looked at the high school government test and the possibility of taking it, I had received kind of some information of, well, get a high school government book and read it and look and study it, and that was the study guide that it was recommended. And I'm just wondering if there are possibilities of a better or more streamlined study guide for everyone.
Right now, for every test in the program, there is a free study guide on the website that includes sample questions that were actually looked at by Indiana teachers and teacher educators as part of our development process. So that piece of information is available for everything.
So I just want everybody to know which chart you're looking at today and what we're doing. So you're looking at the chart that says passing score comparison at the top. And you can actually see the number of questions that are given in the test on the left side. And then you can see the Panel B recommended passing score and the number of questions that the participant would need to get correct. So we're actually going to vote on passing scores, cut scores. So the panel has recommended, Panel B has recommended particular cut scores, and we are charged with doing a preliminary cut scores so that it can go forth through the process. So I'll just throw out a motion to approve the preliminary cut scores for that has been recommended by Panel B.
Second the motion.
Is there more discussion?
Does
Gordon.
state board staff have an opinion?
Actually, we do not. We would probably recommend a panel because of Reese's recommendation.
Thank you. Roll call, please.
Mr. Albert?
Yes.
Mr. Ellison?
Yes.
Dr. Freitas?
Yes.
Mr. Hendry?
Yes.
Ms. Neal?
Yes.
Mrs. O'Brien?
Yes.
Dr. Oliver?
Yes.
Mr. Walker?
Yes.
Mr. Watt?
Yes.
Mrs. Wicker?
Yes.
Superintendent Ritt?
Yes. Motion carries. Thank you very much, ladies.
Thank you.
Next item on the agenda is the A to F appeals process. Maggie Pano from the department, if you would come forth with, and John. This is kind of a joint little presentation. We've been working on this for quite some time.
It is, and if with your permission, I just want to frame it so the board knows what it's going to hear about here in just a moment. This is an appeals process, been a result of a collaborative process between state board staff and DOE staff over the last 2 or 3 months, and it's a two-part process. The first part begins in the Department of Education, and it involves a voluntary audit of a school's A through F data. In other words, a school could voluntarily request that the department audit its data to see if there are any errors, try to correct those, and get that all worked out before there's even any need for an appeal. To the extent that the department doesn't believe it has the jurisdiction or authority to address the school's concerns, those would come to the board in the form of appeal, and we've spelled out a procedure, a simple procedure, we hope, by which the schools would be able to follow that and seek a petition to the board. So that's the overall process. I also want to make the point that the DOE component of this is linked with the state board component of it, but the state board will actually only be voting on the appeals component. The DOE component is an internal process that the DOE is developing. That's not something that's subject to state board approval, but it's necessary that we collaborate with them so that it dovetails effectively and efficiently with the appeals process we're developing. And with that, I'll turn it over to Maggie Pano, and she can explain in a little more detail what this audit process is and answer your questions, and then I'll follow up with a very short discussion of the appeals process.
Thank you, John. Maggie?
Hello. So as John said, we've been working on this process over the past few years, looking at the A through F appeals as they've been conducted. Internally at the department, we've really noticed that there tend to be 2 camps really of appeals that we get, data-driven that are specifically about the data collections and the data that has been reported, and then more that are about how the rule is applied to that particular school. For example, schools that are small schools, and discussing how the A through F rule may be prejudiced towards small schools. They're not about the data collection. What the department would be focusing on in their audits are those data collections and allowing schools the opportunity to review the data and submit to the audit whatever data issues they may have identified. This is ultimately what we've been doing in the appeals process. This just allows the department to have a less formal option than conducting the appeals. Plus, we didn't really feel like that was within our jurisdiction, as John identified that these policy areas really do fall under the board. So I don't know if it was provided. We do have it up on the screen. Ultimately, how we see this kind of laying out. The first audit that we would ultimately have, because it falls under statute, is the graduation rate audit. That would be coming up here soon, where schools would be allowed to submit about their graduation rate if there were students that they said should have been included or should not have been included. That type of issue usually is what arises. Currently under statute, schools with over 5% mobility are already required to submit to an audit, so we thought we would just allow this to be grouped in as one entire full audit for everyone. It's voluntary. However, if they don't exercise it, then the department you know, that's your chance to clean up your data. From there, we would then have our embargoed release of grades, which we do, since we do already. Schools would be able to see what their grade is as the data is calculated. From there, we would have our A through F data audit. So the other data components that go into A through F would then be subjected to an audit period. Before we would release the grades to the state board for a final vote, all of those components of the data audit would be corrected and calculated in. So the results of that audit would be what the department presents as its findings to the state board. At that point, there would be a final placement, and schools could then appeal to the state board through the process that John has outlined to address any of those more policy-driven issues with the way that maybe perhaps the rule is applied to them. If there is an issue through that is resolved and the grade is changed, then we would pursue the process and statute where the grade would be republished and corrected. So that's ultimately the process that we envision. It's not too different from what we've done, except for the fact that we are really separating out the data and the policy aspects of it and really making sure that they are where they belong. With that, I can turn it over.
Go ahead.
Turn it over to John.
Yeah, John?
To talk about the appeals portion of it.
I have a question on the audit.
Oh, we have a question on the audit.
Yeah,
David?
just a quick question for you. On the audit, schools have 30 days from the time that the board places schools into categories, according to what you're recommending to us. And my question deals with not that 30-day provision, but how much time does a school have to complete that audit? Because I envision that probably they're sending the department information, you're responding back, and I assume there's a back and forth kind
Right.
of endeavor. Is there a sunset provision in the resolution for that period in which they are going through the audit?
You know,
So identified on your chart, you have the months in which these will occur. So we would be putting out the timeline, and there's plenty of time so that we can have the give and take. And you'll notice the second audit includes all data except for the graduation rate, because we would have already done that with them. And anybody who wants to relook at the cohorts, anything, we will already have that completed. So we envision that second stage taking far less time, because in the past we've done both at that point, and it's very time-consuming and really is a crunch.
right.
So,
And
So there is no deadline for that. That continues. I just remember last time we did this, a number of schools contacted me to say they provided information. There was a misunderstanding that at some point it appeared that the department cut off the period of the audit, although we called it something else back then.
right.
And so what you're saying is there's some proactive activity that takes place prior, and you're not envisioning that a school will be cut off from the process.
So I think a couple of things I do want to clarify. We have projected timeline information on there. I'm going to say projected because of the fact that of how assessments are going to be and the new accountability system rolling in. So things may be delayed from what you see on that. That's just hopeful. As far as the timelines for the audit, I think that we would still have to require some sort of parameters as far as submission time, or at least providing us notice that they would like to be submitted to an audit. And otherwise, you know, we're never going to get grades finalized. So there will have to be some sort of cutoff. I think the difference here is that I think we're a bit more informal in our process than we would have been if we would continue to do it as an appeals structure like we did last year or the year prior to. So we are more flexible, yes, in working with the schools to make sure, like, hey, we didn't see this documentation when you submitted your audit information for the AT collection. This is the documentation we require, you know, can you get it to us? I think that flexibility will be there, but I would say, yes, we will have timelines and structures so that we can maintain getting grades rolled out and things done at an appropriate time.
But you don't feel that that should be part of what you're proposing to us today, to build in a 30 or 60 or 90-day time period just to be transparent with schools and give the department some empowerment to say at some point this ends? Because I can envision information going back forever in some cases. Do you want to amend this in some way before we vote on it, or are you comfortable the way it's written?
And to be clear, I think John said this process in particular, as far as the audits, the department is developing that, and that's not something you'll be voting on today. You'll be voting strictly on the appeals process.
Okay.
So the timelines for the audits are yet to be established based on how things go for the year. But we do anticipate having structured timelines where, you know, there is, yes, you have to get that information into us, but we're planning on there being a lot more fluidity in the process, I guess, and in the communication structure as far as these audits would go.
Okay, thank you.
John? So now you have a resolution before you regarding the review of performance category placement, which is really the appeal process.
Right, and this is in resolution form to allow the board some flexibility. If we find that something's not working and we just need to change it on a dime, we can do that, because after all, this is the first time we've tried this, so this will be a kind of a beta test in the field. And there could be things you want to change down the road, so this allows you the flexibility to do that. This model is based, it's a simplified version of an administrative appeal process that's used throughout the state of Indiana. And the law requires any agency to simplify that process, and that's what we've tried to do here, is make it simple and user-friendly for schools, to the point of requiring the hearing officers who might be hearing these appeals to explain to the schools what their rights and duties are, and try to avoid, if at all possible, any procedural traps that might prejudice a school and avoid hearing their appeal on the merits. So it's really geared towards the school, their needs. The only thing I might recommend the board approve me doing is at paragraph 14. It gets a little legally technical, and that originally some of those legal technicalities in there were included for the sake of the hearing officers. I've since decided the hearing officers probably should already know what the law is, and so putting it in a document designed for the schools I think may just confuse the schools. So in order to simplify it even more, I thought I might cut out some of those code references and then leave just some of the general instructions, because the point of this was so that schools felt like they could perfect their own appeals to the board, not have to go out and hire an attorney or something to maneuver some sort of procedural minefield. That's not what we wanted to create. This is going to be a very informal process. It's just going to be the school, so it's not going to be an adversarial process. They're just going to show up and say, you know, here's our position, here's our data, and then a hearing officer will decide whether they're right or wrong. And a proposed opinion, the ultimate decision maker is going to be the board, so there'll be a recommendation from staff whether to approve or disapprove that opinion, but ultimately the board is going to decide. So if there are anomalies, if there are instances where the rules seem to work in injustice, the board's perfectly free to address that. It is not handcuffed or bound by any proposal it gets from a hearing officer, but generally we would anticipate most of the hearing officer decisions to be approved. So that's the action I think I'm seeking today, is just permission to go ahead and amend that paragraph 14, make it a little cleaner, a little simpler, and then bring it back to you next month for some sort of final approval. But also allow you the opportunity to comment, give me feedback if you have concerns, things you want to see added in, taken out. Now's your chance to talk to me about that.
Do we have any more questions? Okay. So do we have a motion to approve the modification of the resolution to bring back in March? Any more discussion? Roll call, please.
Mr. Albert?
Yes.
Mr. Ellsworth?
Yes.
Dr. Freitas?
Yes.
Mr. Hendry?
Yes.
Mrs. Neal?
Yes.
Ms. Neal?
Yes.
Ms. O'Brien?
Yes.
Dr. Oliver?
Yes.
Mr. Walker?
Yes.
Mr. Watts?
Yes.
Mrs. Wicker?
Yes.
Superintendent Rich?
Yes. And I just might add that we're going to go ahead and begin our process with graduation rate audit, so we can proceed with our part of the whole entire process. Thank you. You have before you, next item on the agenda, Strategic Planning Committee recommendations. We've had a copy of that. Do I have a motion to approve the recommended updates to the State Board of Education Strategic Plan?
So moved.
Do we have a second?
Second.
Any discussion? Roll call, please.
Mr. Albert?
Yes.
Mr. Ellison?
Yes.
Dr. Freitas?
Yes.
Mr. Hendry?
Yes.
Ms. Neal?
Yes.
Mrs. O'Brien?
Yes.
Dr. Oliver?
Yes.
Mr. Walker?
Yes.
Mr. Watts?
Yes.
Mrs. Wicker?
Yes.
Superintendent Witt?
Yes.
Madam Superintendent? I
Yes.
just wanted to advise you that we had discussed breaking for lunch at a particular time, and
12:30.
I just wanted to let you know, for purposes of running the meeting, that the issue that I needed to attend to at that time has been canceled. So, in terms of breaking, it's, there's no timing requirement from my end, but I appreciate your making that consideration.
Okay. So the next item on the agenda is TNTP presentation recommendations. We have several people to speak to this item. And you have 5 minutes each. Daniel Brugiano, but we would appreciate any brevity. I'm not sure I pronounced your name correctly.
Close enough.
Okay.
Brugioni.
Thank you.
Hi, I just wanted, thank you for allowing me to speak today. I wanted to give a little bit of a, say, a personal side to all the talk of testing and evaluations. I'm here to speak on behalf of the students of Lake Ridge Schools and my fellow teachers. And since Christmas break and since the semester resumed, 50% of my class time or more in some classes has been devoted only to testing. I think there are 5 different tests we've had to take. This is right now. And
What subject do you
I watch
teach?
my AP class,
Excuse
the
me.
honors class.
Oh.
I watch their frustration and I say, I'm so sorry. I can't believe we're doing this. I'm failing you as a teacher. We're failing you as an institution. The low students have said to me, how many times do I have to prove to you that I can't read, that I'm struggling with reading? The tests become, when all we do is test, just predictors of failure. We don't have any class time to help them because next week we have half of our class time is devoted to testing. Most of these are state mandated or vendors that will help you prepare for the state mandated test. And so I can say a little more than, yeah, I can tell you almost exactly what score you're going to get when the test actually counts. And I would like to see if there's any evidence that testing kids, especially in high poverty areas, testing them more than any other group, that helps them in their education and their life. My email address is on there. I'd like to see it. And I'm not talking performance on the test. I'm talking performance long term. Is there any evidence that testing them this much is helping them? And I'd like to see that because I haven't seen anything, and I've really looked. My story, I teach the ECA, sophomore English subject last year. I had 51% of my students pass. 2 years earlier, I had 74% of my students pass. It was the highest test score in our district in English ever. No one really mentioned much to me. My administrator said, good job, there's, practice tests this week. 51%, my principal said, oh my God, our test scores are so awful, I'm freaking out, I can't even sleep. 51%, we dropped 23% in 2 years. What happened? And I said the 51% is the greatest achievement. If you're looking at this, at testing as the parameter, it's the greatest achievement I've ever had as a teacher. We've had a very changing student population. 19 students out of 129 that took the test read at or above a 9th grade level. That's for the STAR reading test, one of the vendors that we, NWEA MAPS test would reiterate that. 19 of my 129 students read at or above a 9th grade level. 51% passed the 10th grade ECA test, and that was presented as a dismal failure. Any other parameter, any other statistical group, that would be a miracle and I would be lauded. And I'm not saying I don't hold much by the test scores. 23% of those kids just passed. I have them as 11th graders again, they just passed. So there are successes there. But we're looking at that 51%, we say that's 23% lower, you failed. That's what I've heard. And so my evaluations are very middling, even though my students just voted me most valuable teacher. Every parameter that I think is important, I'm getting great feedback on, but I'm a C- teacher because of the test scores. That's one of the big concerns I have about extending this evaluation process to include up to 55% of the test scores. Most of my coworkers would be leaving every 2 years based on the RISE model. My needs as a teacher are pretty much completely ignored. I tell my principal, this is what I need to be successful. She said, I'd love to help you. This is what you're going to do. We're doing advanced ed now. Write this narrative. Here's your plan period. It's gone. Work with your teachers to do this. I have almost all the accountability, almost none of the power. And I think what really frustrates me is I'm able to do so much less for my students. So much less, even though I'm working harder than I ever have before. I'm constantly apologizing to them. It's really frustrating, and I think something needs to be done, and I think we need to talk to teachers and not consulting firms if we're talking about anything, talking about expanding testing, expanding evaluations to include more testing, and the policies that are being presented are almost wholly void of common sense. They're out of step with where our students are, and they don't seem terribly compassionate. So I'm challenge the board to start making decisions with the successes of our students in mind. Thank you.
Thank you very much. John O'Neill.
Thank you, Superintendent Ritz, members of the board. I am John O'Neill with the Indiana State Teachers Association. I will try to be very brief. First of all, I'm losing my voice from testifying at the legislature. And I also know that you've heard a number of comments today, and I'm sure that you are going to hear more on this issue. My comments on TNTP's policy recommendations could take a number of directions. I could talk about the loss of local control over the evaluations. I could talk about the fact that the board would now have the power, if certain legislation coincides with these recommendations, to shift the oversight of up to 289 local plans away from the DOE. I could go on and on about some of the issues that I'm sure you're going to hear from educators in this room today, but I want to make sure that I touch on something that I don't think has been addressed yet, and that is the process by which these recommendations came about, and what I believe to be a lack of transparency. Not trying to put the blame on anyone, but I think that the time allocated to gaining input during these supposed stakeholder meetings, and then the survey process that was crunched into such a short time when this has been going on for months, and then just a few days before this meeting today, educators were able to comment online. We actually put our own link to the survey up, but again, by that time it was really too late to get a lot of comment. So again, I'm not trying to blame anyone. I just wanted to express our disappointment because we really hope that our members and educators throughout the state would have had more time to comment on these surveys, and even more importantly, more involvement in the stakeholder meetings that went across the state. And from what I have heard is that some of these meetings were not well publicized, at least in the media, and that the times and dates were a little bit vague, and that also within the meetings even though they did kind of invite what we've referred to as the education community, it wasn't necessarily classroom educators. It happened to include a number of stakeholders from various organizations. And I would, I really think it's vital to understand what people who are actually in the classroom have to say. So I just wanted to offer those comments. Again, I could go on and on about this issue or a number of other things going on next door, but I just wanted to make sure that the board was aware of our concern over that process. So I'd be happy to answer any questions or go into further detail if you would like, but thank you for that opportunity.
Thank you. Gordon?
I'd like to just ask staff, how many comments have we received to date from members of the public, including teachers?
And do you have that for Indiana teachers? And do you have that data for Indiana teachers?
So in Jessica Conlon's presentation, she has an update on how many teachers exactly engaged either in the focus groups or in the surveys, as well as a distribution of administrators over this time, and external non-administrators, non-teachers who engaged as well. So she will be giving an update in the actual presentation.
Do we have a ballpark number?
From the survey, my ballpark number is 2,500. I might be off a little bit on that, but that's the ballpark number I can give you right now just to help you with this conversation.
Does that reflect the Indiana teachers? I know that I had
Yes.
concerns brought to me that you could take the survey and indicate that you were a teacher outside of the state of Indiana.
They could select if they were outside of Indiana, and when I saw the breakout of that number, it was like less than 10 of those were outside of Indiana, and why they would take it, I'm not really sure, but that was an option in case somebody moved out of the state and still wanted to respond, or was licensed in Indiana and moved out of the state and still wanted to respond. Jessica can give you the actual breakout of the numbers, though, but that's my rough ballpark.
I would just add too, John, that we echoed your concerns at the last strategic planning committee meeting, and we specifically asked that there be an opportunity for teachers and others to comment online, and definitely hear your concern about a truncated response period. So thank you.
Superintendent, could I just make one quick comment?
Yes, in
and
response.
Mr. Henry, first of all, I'm happy to hear that the board doesn't plan on moving any percentage today. That certainly gives educators more time for input, and also, ISTA would like to be involved if possible in those conversations. I know that this issue is going on across the street, and we're having those conversations with legislators. So I wanted to make it clear that was something that we were happy to hear today. I knew that when I brought this issue up, I would open myself up to comments about what sort of data was received, and that number, I realize that the result is we can say that that's a great result. But again, this is more about the process than what came of the survey results. So I just wanted to highlight that. So
Thank
again,
you.
thank you.
Ryan Russell?
Good morning.
Good morning.
My name is Ryan Russell. I am the Assistant Superintendent for Educator Effectiveness in the MSD of Warren Township here in Indianapolis. Part of my responsibilities include overseeing all certified employee performance evaluation here or in Warren Township. We all know that teacher evaluations transformed significantly in Indiana over the past several years. I, like so many educators, have embraced these changes. I have witnessed firsthand the dramatic improvements in the way educators have been supported in increasing their effectiveness. Today I want to express some thoughts about some possible actions we should take potentially before moving to defining what the word significant means. Who would have thought the word significant would be so ambiguous, but we find ourselves at that place right now. In Warren Township, here's some background. We consider significant 10% because it changes the categorical rating of teachers. In fact, this last year, as we turned in our DOE EE report, 104 teachers' evaluations results were changed once we incorporated student achievement and growth data into there. I support defining consistency, and I truly believe student achievement and growth needs to be in a teacher's performance evaluation. We're obviously here today to talk about the new teacher project's recommendation that student growth and achievement should account for up to 50% of a teacher's performance evaluation. No pun intended, but this has started a significant amount of dialogue amongst educators in the state. Before I dive deeper, I do want to express a few philosophical beliefs that I don't believe can be argued. For one, you cannot quantify everything a teacher does to benefit a child. And two, there are several factors that impact a student's achievement that a teacher has no control over. To prescribe higher weights, like 50%, the teachers will do nothing but hurt Indiana's most vulnerable students. Student achievement is significantly influenced by poverty. If Indiana wants the highest quality teachers working with its most vulnerable students, it should recognize that there are significant differences in what teachers do and face depending on whom they serve. To argue against this would only demonstrate one's lack of wherewithal about public education. Do we really believe that if we moved highly effective teachers from a middle-class community to a high-poverty community, that those students would perform better? If we do, let's simply set up a teacher exchange program, and that'll solve the world's problems. How will high-poverty schools recruit the best and brightest educators when their evaluation will be subject to more deflation than a New England Patriots football? All of this because it's a little late, but I couldn't resist. I'm sorry. All of this because of factors that are outside of a teacher's control. Teachers do have the most significant impact on all school-related factors. We all know that and agree with that. But we cannot fail to consider the factors outside of the school. I do respect the complexity of the issue, but it really boils down to how we define the word effectiveness. Are we talking about effective at improving test scores or effective at educating the whole student? I understand that it's not one or the other, it's really both and. Student achievement is important and it's critical to our success, but as we've heard today, it's forced teachers through regulation and fear to ignore the aspects of education that positively impact all students. Here are a few things that I think we can think at first before we define what the word significant means. First, let's figure out how to give performance awards to educators that most significantly impact student growth and achievement. This is a tall task, but one that would focus on rewarding excellence and not penalizing teachers who are facing great challenges. Right now, this is being determined through a collective bargaining process, where personally I don't necessarily agree with that. However, let's use the student performance as a foundation for teacher performance awards and keep it outside of teacher evaluation. This should be done on a teacher-by-teacher basis, not school-by-school or district-by-district, but reward the individual teachers who are showing evidence that are impacting student achievement. Second, we need to do a better job of supporting and holding administrators accountable for appropriately addressing a teacher's effectiveness on an effectiveness rubric. There are several factors included in the rubrics which we can quantify. In Warren, we're able to provide a significant amount of evidence that demonstrates and justifies the categorical placement of every teacher. I can point to specific evidence for all 799 teachers who we evaluated this year and tell you exactly which category they were placed in. I believe this should be the norm, not the anomaly, not the exception. When the process is transparent, you'll have more valid results if you're concerned about validity. There's a fine line between local control and ambiguity. Yes, we want local control, but we also need clear guidance. Local control without guidance spawns overreaching regulation. I, like so many others in the field, are more than willing to be a part of the solution and the path moving forward, but please call on us for help. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Scott Zahner, I'm not sure I pronounced that correctly. Yes. That must be you. Thank you. Well, I didn't know if it was a short O or a long O.
Superintendent Ritz, members of the board, thank you for the opportunity to speak today. As we're well aware, in a few moments you're going to hear recommendations from TNTP regarding teacher evaluations. One of the recommendations in the report will be to more thoroughly define objectionable measures of student achievement and growth that significantly inform teacher evaluations, as is currently defined in the Indiana Code. At the heart of the debate is the percentage of teachers throughout the state rated as effective and highly effective, and the notion that these high percentages are not supported by the anecdotal evidence of public perception. In addition, through our attempts to create greater transparency through the 8th REF system, we have noted that the high percentage of effectively rated teachers is not compatible with the overall grades of all schools across the state. First off, I commend the board and the IDOE for thoughtfully reviewing this process and refusing to play politics with this very important issue. I am confident that there are individuals outside of education with the opinion that an increase in the required amount of student data in teacher evaluation will generate more accurate results. I am speaking today because although those are well-intended notions, those preconceived notions, if regulated, will result in unintended consequences that would negatively impact student learning. Research tells us that ultimately an effective teacher evaluation system accomplishes two goals. One, it improves teachers across the entire spectrum, including effective teachers. Secondly, it efficiently removes ineffective teachers, thus reducing the amount of time students are subjected to ineffective instruction. In order for these two goals to occur, the evaluation feedback must be timely, and the quantitative and qualitative data must be reliable. As we've discussed at length already, the challenges with this year's ISTEP exam call into question the reliability and the validity of the ISTEP exam that we're going to be collecting. These concerns are symbolic of our need to review the notion of mandating student test results in teacher evaluation. I want to keep in mind that our current Indiana law specifically cites TAP as a model teacher evaluation system. It's written in Indiana code, and it's written in there for a reason. It's a model teacher evaluation system. Having used TAP in a prior district, I ask that you also keep in mind that TAP does not use student data in their evaluations. This allows for multiple teacher evaluations to occur throughout the school year that are timely and are relevant. Most importantly, if a teacher is unsuccessful in his or her needed improvement, because the evaluator is not waiting on assessment results the next fall of the next school year to complete the evaluation, personnel decisions can occur in a more timely and efficient manner. Again, I appreciate the difficult work of this board, and I wish to offer my assistance in any policy that would be drafted as a result of these recommendations. Thank you.
Thank you. Justin Oakley.
I was going to say good morning, but it's afternoon. I'll be brief. Thank you for having me. Thanks for all of you for being here and all the wonderful people that have come here. I'm sick. I need my teacher voice today, and I'm sick. I am here representing AFT Indiana. I taught for 10 years. I taught middle school history, and I taught 1 year high school advanced government. And I have some talking points on my thing here I just wanted to bring up real quick. I think everybody's covered a lot of the bulwark here. If you haven't got the message today that testing is creating quite a stir here in the state of Indiana. And I have a couple points to that. We've talked about, one of the board members here today said there was an interesting article in the New York Times. I'll stick with 3 themes: the New York Times, Washington Post, steering the ship, and deflated balls on that with the deflate gate. But the Washington Post just recently sent a letter to Arnie Duncan warning him about VAM, value-added measurement, and test scores, putting test scores on to teachers' evaluations. And they used these words, that it would be disastrous, it's disingenuous, and there was one more. I'm sorry, I'm not feeling well today. But if you can look at that, it's on their Google. It was right up to date. Some statistics, statisticians and datistician experts wrote him a letter and said, what you're doing is we need to pause this and slow down. So when I saw this report that 50% would be based on an evaluation, here's what I thought. You better put out giant billboards the size of this building to try to recruit people to come to Indiana to teach, because no one's going to come here. Nobody. That's a fact. That's a true fact. Half of people quit after 5 years. The USA Today had a Ball State poll that half enrollment's down half. I used to get student teachers, early field experience people. They'd call me. Nothing. There's none anymore. Nobody's doing this. I spoke at a young forum a while back. Not one person at IU was enrolled in the social studies education programs. Not one. You know why? Why would they do that? They're scared to death. They do pay attention. They have iPhones and iPads. We've been told we're #1 in school choice. Guess what? Put another #1 sign up there of teachers leaving the profession. It's a fact. Listen, all I'm asking is that you listen. It doesn't matter if we say we're from the unions or the parent councils or wherever. If this many people in a room are showing up, I know you guys got emails the last 3 or 4 days. Thank you to the 3 of you that responded to me. Appreciate that for you taking out the time to do that for me. But you're creating a system here where if you want the attentions of teachers who are supposed to be in the room teaching, now they're focused on what you're doing all the time. And I think you guys are all of you are intelligent people. I appreciate all the work that you do. And Glenda, you took out one Goliath, and now you're in. I feel like you're always in. Now I should start calling you David, or Daniel in the lion's den. Because God bless you for all that you do. Thank you.
Steve Baker.
Good afternoon, Superintendent Ritz, State Board. I appreciate you allowing me to speak with you. My name is Steve Baker, Principal of Bluffton High School. I do want to thank TNTP for helping lead the discussion of teacher evaluation. Very important topic. I was able to be part of 2 of these discussions, so I was appreciative of that. I was also part of the original Educator Evaluation Committee that met about 3 years ago, so I was part of that as well. I've also been a practicing administrator for 19 years, so evaluating teachers is a large part of what I do. I've read every word of the TNTP recommendation and their research, and I've read the CEL and the INTAS policy perspective as well, and I think there are some good things that can come out of that, and one of those is communication, like what we're doing today. I believe that that's going to be essential as we move forward. I think things like vision setting, educator engagement, I think that will be key as we move forward to include educators, teachers, principals should be very well represented there. Overall, cleaning up some revisions is essential. Something else that was not talked about yet, I like the idea. Teachers being rated at the bottom 2 categories for 2 years in a row before a salary increases in help. Interesting. That's an interesting topic that I think could use further discussion. I do have a few concerns. Not as many as what I saw as possible strengths there, but I do have a few concerns, just 3 of them. Number 1 is local control. I think you've heard enough on that, and I'm going to go into that. But I think that was one of the strengths of the original model, was that allowing each school district to have the flexibility to make it work for you instead of you working for it. That's key for a principal working with whatever model we have. We must retain some of that local control so that we can make it work for our school system. The second thing, enough talk about student data. You have that before you, and you've had a lot of people talking about that. I don't think we can fix any problem by setting heavier metrics in that area or making terms like negative impact more rigorous. I don't think that will fix any problems. But I want to talk about the third thing that's kind of been talked about. We've not used the word, and it's a big word that I believe in, and that's culture. And that's what I really want to spend the rest of the time on. That's the thing I'm most concerned as we talk about any of these things, any legislative, state board mandates. That's the thing I think we need to be mostly concerned about. The reality is, and it's been talked about, and it is true, the reality is we are losing good teachers. I'm a principal, I will tell you that. We're losing good teachers, but more important, also as important is good teachers, good future teachers are not entering the profession. I do have statistics. All across Indiana, anywhere from 25 to 50% reduction in our teacher preparation programs. That represents thousands of teachers, thousands. And I think a large number of those could be highly effective and effective teachers. We're not getting into our profession to help in the most challenging areas. Give you one example. I hired a fine arts teacher about 6 years ago, had over a dozen applicants. 3 years ago, 6 applicants. Last year, 2. I'm nervous if that teacher ever leaves. And I know it's not going to get any better. If we changed everything today, it's going to take 4 or 5 years to get those numbers through. I am very concerned about that part. And I'm not saying the teacher evaluation tool is doing that. I'm not saying that. Please hear that. I just think that's part of the culture that we need to get people back into this profession. I need them. I need them desperately in my building, working with my at-risk students. This is also being talked about, I know you know this, at the national level. ESEA, Senator Alexander is addressing the same thing. Republicans and Democrats, and they are taking a stance, and I'm not going to go into all the data again. You guys are very well read, but take a look at what they're saying. They are backing away from student data. Tennessee, who was one of the leaders of student backing away, Governor Bill Haslam has a bill reducing student data. Kentucky, New York are all having debates about reducing student data. It's a big deal because I believe it has not addressed what they wanted it to fix. And I think we need to take a very hard look at that because I think eventually we're going to talk about student data. Eventually, we're going to have to make someone's going to make a recommendation about student data, and we need to keep that in mind as we go through that. We've already talked about all the other influences on a teacher. Troy is right. There are last meeting in January, there are influences outside the school teacher has no control over. BJ was right when he also said you move the teacher to a different school, you move that teacher's data score. Those things are true. Here's what I want to focus on. What makes a great teacher? That's what I want us to do. And if we want to turn around schools, culture will do that, not focusing on data. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Sandy Cole.
Good morning, Superintendent Ritz, Board of Education. I'm speaking today on behalf of my colleague, Dr. Murphy, and the InTest project in Indiana. And we really appreciate the opportunity to speak with you today and to provide some feedback in terms of the recommendations that TNTP has presented to you. I'm going to read my comments because I know that's the best way to stay within my 5 minutes because, as many of you know, I could talk about this topic for a long time. The recommendations related to teacher and principal training are aligned with the findings from our recent survey, and we are pleased to see an emphasis on providing training that can be applied to all evaluation models and plans. We also fully support the recommendation that teachers be trained on evaluation systems, as we believe that this will provide a more collegial discussion between evaluators and teachers. We have created online modules for evaluators and teachers that are model neutral and are aligned with research-based standards and will be available this fall. We're also pleased to see the recommendations regarding compensation for those teachers who are rated in need of improvement. It's our belief that this change would result in more accurate ratings by evaluators. And if the purpose and intent of teacher evaluation is to support improvement, then it only makes sense to compensate those teachers who are in the improvement category. In the end, the ultimate goal of teacher evaluation should be to improve teaching and learning. With respect to monitoring plans for consistency, we agree that the monitoring process is very important, and the IDOE has put in place a good process to assess compliance. However, we would like to see support for differentiated ratings for districts that would formally acknowledge districts that have high-quality plans that are being implemented with fidelity, because simply being compliant will not ensure that the system of evaluation will have created a shared understanding and acceptance among school personnel, a culture for shared responsibility, or a system of internal accountability. Rather, it will only be a system of external accountability. A hopeful outcome is that districts will not only be compliant, but will be motivated to have quality plans in place, implement those plans with fidelity, and monitor the data to continually improve their own evaluation systems. There are districts in this state that meet these standards, and it's important to recognize and encourage this. We do not disagree that the weight for student learning data should be consistent across districts, and that a range should be decided upon. However, neither research nor practice has yet identified what the correct correlation of student learning to teacher impact is. Additionally, the confidence in the weights for student growth is directly related to the confidence in the measures, including IGM and other common core assessments. In our recent brief, we addressed this issue. The debate is centered upon the appropriate weight. However, the more important conversation could be about the appropriate and effective use of student growth rather than the right weight. Further exploring ideas in the research literature should provide information that would be helpful in decision-making around this important concept. Any specified requirement for weighting student growth in evaluation requirements and the basis for the weight should be able to be explained in clear and transparent ways. We have concerns with the recommendation for differentiated weights for different groups of teachers. Regardless of the weight range determined to be appropriate, we would encourage you to consider the same weights for all teachers. It has been our experience that this differentiated weighting sends some unintended messages to teachers. Their curriculum and content areas are not as valued, the learning of their students is not as important, or that the higher weight for tested area teachers isn't fair. It can become divisive within the school culture, and it does not encourage a collaborative school environment. The state of Indiana and those who educate Indiana's children have an opportunity and the responsibility to get this right. The Indiana legislation was a good start in the right direction for improving teacher effectiveness and student learning. We must view the implementation and application of the legislation as a work in progress, as an opportunity to continue to redefine policy and practice to ensure the spirit of the law and its intended purpose. Dr. Murphy and I, on behalf of INTAS, would welcome any opportunity to support this board and the IDOE to move forward with proposed recommendations. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So do we want to take the motion first, have a second, and then do discussion? Or do we want to hear presentations first?
I'd like to,
Or take a break?
well, I'd like to speak to that, but that's okay. I can wait till after lunch. It's fine.
Say that again, Brad?
I had a couple comments to make, but I can hold them till after lunch. I'm fine with whichever we want to do, so.
So I did let the public know that we were going to recess at 12:30, and people may have made plans to actually do something at that time. So let's reconvene here at 1 o'clock, okay? And we will then take the TNTP's recommendations.
If I
Sarah?
may, when we do come back, I would appreciate having the presentation first. I think there are a lot of misconceptions right
No
now
problem.
about the actual report. I think it would be helpful before we make a motion.
No problem. Okay. We'll,
I feel like we have to rebuttal before the... Well, I don't know.